is the way things are run, how things are run, how things are organized. So basically, governance has to do with how things are run and how things are organized. So is it important the way we organize something? Is it important the way things are run? Is government important? Now, I'm going to work first with the familiar way we understand government, because normally when we talk about governance, we think of them more in a political sense. So is the way a nation is governed important? Is it important? Is it more important than the leaders of the nation? Is it more important than the economy? Is it more important than everything else that happens? Is governance important? Now, if you look at the political world or nations of the world, you'll find that nations are governed in two main ways. There are two main ways that nations are governed. And when we talk about nations, we are talking about authoritarian governments. Authoritarian governments would include things like absolute monarchies. There are only a few left in the world. And then we have things like dictatorships, most of them military. We have a few theocracies, and so on and so forth. These will be governances where the people have very little say over how things are run. A group of people decide how things are run, and they run it that way. And sometimes they run a very successful government. And so in our world, we can think of a few countries that are authoritarian. You can think of China. You can think of Russia. And currently we think of Iran and a few other countries that are authoritarian. In other words, the people don't really determine how things are run. There is a body that runs things. And then politically, we have the democratic governments, and under them you have republics. And that would have countries like most Western countries, Great Britain, Germany, France, United States. And you come to Ghana, Africa. Ghana is a democratic country. We are not authoritarian. Now, does it matter whether a country is authoritarian or a democracy? Does it matter? How many of you think whether it matters or not? Does it matter? Does it matter? Who thinks it matters? Who thinks it doesn't matter? All right. Now, if you look at an authoritarian country, let's say China or Russia or even Dubai, because authoritarian, people don't elect who is going to run the country. Can we say that because they are authoritarian, they are not doing well? No. Some of them are really doing well, particularly China. But I'm going to ask you a question. If you were given the option to live in, for example, the United States of America with all its problems, or Great Britain with all its problems, or France with all its problems, and you have to choose between that and going to live in China with all its success, where would you choose to live? Where would you choose? I rarely see people who say, I want to become a Chinese citizen. They would say, I want to go and do business in China, go and buy things, come and sell, go to Dubai, buy things and sell. But you don't really want to live there, because part of what you want to be when you live in a country is you want to have a say in the way the country is run, and you want to have a certain guaranteed liberty as a person. So the prosperity is great, but the governance is also important. All right? Now, there is a big war going on now. Some people don't call it war, whatever it is, but it's between the United States of America and Iran. And it's a very difficult thing to process. People have their own views. Some think America is right, some think Iran is right, some think Iran is being bullied, America is being bullied, and all of that. But it's also a war of two different governments. And no matter how wrong you think America is, and they could be wrong, or how wrong you think Iran is, and they could be wrong, or I don't know who is wrong or right. But if you have to choose between which country you want to live in, between those two countries, which one would you wish you were a citizen of? And why would you choose one of them? Is it because you like Trump or you like the Ayatollahs? No, it has nothing to do with the leaders. It all has to do with government, the way the nation is run. Even if they have a bad leader, you know very soon there will be a change. But if they have a bad leader and there's no chance of a change, then we have a very, very big problem. So governance is very important. Governance is very important. It's important for nations and it's important for churches. So one day, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, somebody is going to decide a church they want to become a part of. Which church would that person want to be a part of? Would they want to be a part of a church where they have no say at all in what happens in the church, or they want to be part of a church where they can have a say in how things are done in the church? Invariably, people like to belong to something they think they are a part of. And they are a part of it because their idea, their voice, their thoughts, and that of that organization are merged together. And what they feel matters. So I just said all of that just to give us a background to governance. And I will talk about it now. I'll add church governance. So when we talk about church governance, think of the way nations are run, and now think of the way churches are run. Is there a way in which churches should be governed? And if there is a way, what way is that? And how should churches be governed? And how should they be governed so that they last for a very, very long time? Now, throughout my presentation, for all the times I'll be speaking, I'll be saying some things that are not very comfortable. All right? And you know, of late, I say things and people get very upset with me. And I don't say it for fun. I don't say it because I want to upset people. But I say it because I'm very, very deeply concerned about where we are going. And just things we are doing and whether we are building lasting churches or we're doing things that can survive for more than our lifetime. And so I say these things, and especially if you are a new Christian and a charismatic and so on, some of the things I say may go totally against what you have learned for a very long time. And hopefully through this session, I'm going to take my time to teach, and then also I'm going to take my time to answer questions. And hopefully we can get to the point where we can push beyond where we are to where we ought to be. But broadly speaking, there are three main ways by which a church is governed. Three main ways. The first way is what we call the episcopal system. Episcopal. Episcopal system is a system of government or running a church which is very hierarchical. It is top down. So in anarchy, it's hierarchical. Hierarchy. I don't even know whether the E comes first or I comes first. Those of you who know English, have I spelled it right? Have I? Okay, hierarchy. Okay. So in an episcopal system, we're dealing with hierarchy. And in an absolute term, an episcopal system can be very authoritarian. It runs from top to bottom. Somebody at the top determines how things should be run. And I'll go in and explain it a little better. But throughout church history, it developed with what is called the bishopric system. It's a system which is run by bishops. Bishops not just by title, but bishops by a certain function. And there are people who call themselves bishop now who may not even be episcopal. They just have the title. But historically, a bishop is an episcopal person. And I will take time to explain what it is. But that's the first way. If you want a church that is run this way as episcopal, the classic episcopal church is the Roman Catholic Church, with the Pope at the top and then cardinals and bishops down under the Pope. So the Roman Catholic Church is episcopal. But it is not the only episcopal church. The Anglican Church is also episcopal, but it runs a different kind of episcopacy. Although it is hierarchical, it levels at a certain point. So it's not as sharp and episcopal as the Catholic Church. The Lutheran Church sometimes is Episcopal, and even the Methodist Church sometimes is Episcopal, but not the same kind of episcopacy as the Catholic Church. So even in the Episcopal Church, there are hybrid forms of the Episcopal Church. And the hybrid comes because they mix the Episcopal with the second kind of church system that we have, and that is the presbytery. The presbytery system is more like shared leadership. So whereas Episcopal is very hierarchical, at the presbytery level, it's shared leadership. That means that there's no one person who bosses everything. There could be one person, but he's first among equals. He's not apex, it's flat. And there is a group that works to run the church. The church is run by a group of leaders instead of one person. All right. So that's the presbytery church. The quintessential church that runs a presbytery system is, of course, the Presbyterian Church, because this form of church government started during the Protestant Reformation in the 1600s. And many churches run a presbytery system, including a lot of Pentecostal churches run a presbytery system. The third level of church government is called congregational. Congregational churches. And as the name implies, a congregational church is run by the congregation. Everybody in the church runs the church. So in Episcopal church, if a decision is going to be made, it is made at the top by the bishop. In the presbytery system, if a decision is going to be made, it is made by a group of people, a group of leaders. In the congregational system, if a decision is going to be made, it is made by the entire church. So normally in a congregational church, the whole church will vote on a matter. So let's say we're going to have a program in the church, or the church is going to is developing its annual budget, and so people will do a presentation and say, this is the budget of the church, those who say this, and everybody votes. They count the votes, the majority carries the day, and that's how the church is governed. If the church needs a pastor is not posted in an Episcopal system. A bishop or somebody at the top will post the pastor. In a presbytery system, a group of people will post a pastor. In the congregational system, nobody will post the pastor. The congregation would sit and say, okay, we need a new pastor because maybe our former pastor is no longer, for whatever reason, is no longer there. We need a new pastor. How do we get a new pastor? They're going to do something called a pastor call. So they're going to put an advert and say, ABC Church has a vacancy for a pastor. Interested persons apply. So interested pastors apply, and they would have interviews. So the church will interview the people, and then they will preach. So this week, this one comes to preach. Next week, that one comes to preach. Next week, that one comes to preach. Next week, that comes to preach. And then they will ask the church, which one of them is most suitable? And people will vote. And they would say, we like Pastor A, who preach well, because he's humorous. Pastor B, we don't like his dressing. We don't think he should be a pastor. So they choose their pastor. And that's a congregational system. Now, a congregation in Ghana, we don't have congregational churches. But congregational churches are very much in the United States of America. A lot of Baptist churches are congregational. Even Assemblies of God has a mix of congregational and presbytery run churches. A lot of single churches in America are congregational churches. The church is self-governed. It's an extreme form of democracy. All right. Now, it gets very complicated if the church has branches. Then the organization now gets a little bit complicated. But that's basically the three forms of church government: Episcopal system, hierarchical; presbytery, shared leadership; congregational, everybody having a say in how the church is run. Now, are any of them bad and any of them good? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Some have strengths that serve them well, and weaknesses that they have to manage. Some are easier to run, some are more difficult to run. Some allow people to have a say, others limit how much say people have. But I would take congregational out for Ghana and most African churches. In fact, I'm In Ghana, only a few churches are congregational. I can count them. Only a few. And they are not very well-known churches. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. But there are a few congregational churches in Ghana. But I'm not going to talk about it because it's not what people are familiar with. In Ghana, we have mostly churches that are either Episcopal or Presbytery run. And among Pentecostal, or I won't say Pentecostals, among charismatics, most Pentecostal churches, and by that I mean churches like the Assemblies of God Church of Pentecost, Apostolic Church, Christ Apostolic, most of them are Presbytery run. Most of them are Presbytery run. There is a group of elders or a group of leaders, and it's a shared leadership. Nobody is so high above the others. Most charismatic churches tend to be Episcopal. No matter the title that they give themselves, most tend to be Episcopal. And the reason is because most charismatic churches are first-generation churches. And because they are first-generation churches, one person tends to have so much power in the church. So it's help charismatics, but it may unhelp them if we don't help the situation. But most charismatics tend to be Episcopal. Now, so what has this got to do with the way churches are run? And I deal with all of this in detail in my new book, which is coming up. I think it will be launched tomorrow. I talk about church leadership or leading the church and church governance for emerging, new and emerging churches. And when I say emerging or new churches, I mean any church that has been formed within the last 50 years. Any church that is less than 50 years is a new church, and it's emerging. And you may think the church is old. ICGC is 42 years. You think we are old. But in terms of churches, we are infants. Because churches are organizations that are there for hundreds of years. So if churches tend to be 1,000 years or 500 years and you are 42, you are a toddler. All right. Now, people will look at me and call me a papa and whatever, but I'm not a papa by any definition, because what we are doing, we are at the toddler stage. And there's no charismatic leader who is at that level called to be hailed that way. Everybody is new and emerging. 50 years in the life of a church is very, very young. Very, very young. Very, very young. It's at the infancy. So whether the church was started 50 years ago, it was started 5 years ago, they are all within the same age group. Very young churches. And emerging churches will have to think about, what do we do in the future? How does this thing last for 1,000 years? My intention is that ICGC, for example, will last for over 1,000 years. And the same for all the churches, that Action will be over 1,000 years, and Lighthouse will be over 1,000 years, and CCC will be over 1,000 years. Now, if we're going to build churches that are over 1,000 years, then government is very important. If you want to build a church that is for 50 years, 70 years, then the person is very important. The person God called, the so-called anointing he has, the so-called grace he has, or whatever thing he puts on himself, is the most important thing if you want a short-term church. But if you want a long-term church, then something must happen. We have to move from person to system. This transition must take place. And if we're going to build a system, we have to determine whether we're building an Episcopal, a Presbytery, or a congregational system, or a hybrid, a mix of that. And if you read my book, I do a whole study on all of that to determine how we go. All right. Now, why is this also important now? What does it affect? One of the key things that church governance affects, which many of us may not think that is very important. The first major thing church governance affects is doctrine. What the church believes. Because if a church must endure, it must know what it believes. And what it believes as a Christian church must be deeply in Christ. Now, the question then is, who determines doctrine? Who determines the doctrine of a church? If it's ICGC, who determines the doctrine? If it's a particular church, who determines what the church believes in? If you run a very episcopal system, then the person at the top is the one who is determining what everybody believes in. If you run a presbytery system, then it means a group of people are determining what the church believes in. If you run a congregational system, it means all of us are determining what we believe in, and that can be very chaotic sometimes. So sometimes in order to do this, you have to go back to the early church. You know, I was talking to somebody not too long ago, and he said to me, the church must discover the ancient pathways. Have you heard that phrase? We have to discover the ancient. So I said, what is the ancient pathways? He said, we have to, you know, so he mentioned people, you know, the T.L. Osborne and, you know, these guys, Kenneth Hagin and so on. I said, that's ancient for you? You think they are ancient? People who lived not too long ago are ancient? Then what would you do with Wesley? And then what do you do with Calvin? John Calvin? What do you do with Martin Luther? And this is just 500 years. Then what do you do with Thomas Aquinas? Is he ancient? What do you do with Augustine? Is he ancient? What do you do with Irenaeus? Is he ancient? What do you do with Ignatius? Is he ancient? Then what do you do with Paul? And what do you do with Peter? And what do you do with the Ancient of Days himself, Jesus? Are you getting me? So when we say, let's go back to the ways of the fathers, which fathers are you talking about? Immediate fathers or the fathers' fathers? Am I the father? You know, people call me, and people at my age, the fathers of the faith. When people talk, and it's like, I understand. They are children who have grown homeless. So when they see every adult, they embrace it and say, that's my father. That's my father. It's like, unfortunately, when you go to an orphanage, and every child wants, and you're a man, everybody wants you to be their daddy because they are orphans. So when people look at me and they say, these are the fathers of the faith, you sure? Me? Men say, I'm the fathers of the faith? Or people will look at people like Pastor Deboe and Bishop Oyedepo and all. They are, in a sense, yes, they are fathers in the sense that they are older, they've been around. But when we are talking about the Christian faith, it goes beyond me. It goes beyond people who existed 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago. Because Christianity is not 100 years. It's not 200 years. It's not 300 years. Christianity is 2,000 years. But if you plug even beyond Christianity into Judaism, then we're going way longer. The Church of Jesus Christ, the church started its life. I mean, if you consider that Jesus Christ was born, according to how it is calculated, Jesus was born somewhere around BC 4. Between BC 4 and BC 6, or 6 BC. But let's say 4 BC. Now, if he's born 4 BC, and Jesus, traditionally, we say lived for 33 years, then Jesus died, resurrected, everything around AD 29. All right. Now, AD 29 till now, that means that by the year 2029, the church will most likely be exactly 2,000 years. Christianity will be 2,000 years if we go with AD 29. And the reason, I mean, some of these dates are a bit, you know, people have different dates, and I'm not really arguing about what dates, but somewhere in that proximity, whether 29 or 30 or 31 or 28 or whatever, within that proximity, that's when Christianity started. On the day of Pentecost, in the spring of AD 29, somewhere there, the Holy Spirit came and the church was formed. So now, if I say I'm a Christian and I'm thinking of Christian doctrine, how far should I go? Who knows how far I should go? If we are determining the doctrine for our church, what our church believes in, if we want to determine what ICGC believes in, or what your church believes in, or what anybody's church believes in, or somebody says God has called me and I have a revelation, and this is what this is the message God has given to me. Should we trust your message, or we should go beyond your message? Are you getting me? Now, if you say a man of God or a pastor comes and says, this is the revelation God gave me, or this is the word God has given, this is my assignment. We understand that, but are you part of Christianity? Yes. And when were you born? 70 years ago. So you mean before 70 years before you came, there was nothing? There was no doctrine? Christianity didn't exist. You came to invent it? No. Christianity was there before you were born. So if we're going to now determine doctrine, I cannot determine doctrine simply based on what somebody is saying currently. I have to go back to what Christians have been saying for 2,000 years. Are you following what I'm saying? Now, so when we are determining doctrine, we don't look at persons and how popular they are now. You see, because the thing about life is that somebody who is extremely popular now, in 100 years, people wouldn't even know he existed. Are you getting me? You know, recently in Ghana, when we were doing this debate about Kotoka International Airport and all of that, and Kotoka removed Kotoka's name, some say let his name stay. And I listened to the argument and I say, wow, if you were in Ghana in 1967, you would never think that debate will ever arise. Because in 1967, the most popular Ghanaian was General E.K. Kotoka. But a whole generation have arisen for whom Kotoka means slippers. And they don't... Do you get what I'm saying? So somebody who is very popular one time, in the sense of history, it's nothing. It's nothing. So if we're just basing everything on current popularity, and we say, oh, because this is a new revelation, new word God has given, and because of that, we're going to build doctrine out of what a person is saying, because we have a system where one person is the one who determines the doctrine. Can you imagine how faulty that doctrine would be? It's going to be very faulty. It may last the person's lifetime, but it will not last if we're going to build something that will last for 1,000 years, for 2,000 years. If we intend that the movements we're building today will outlive us way into history, then we have to go deeper than just what is being said now. All right? Now, I have a few minutes and then I'll be continuing, so don't worry. In the book I've written, for those of you who are church founders, I give you a list of church documents from a historical point of view that you have to read, and lists of doctrinal positions you have to read. You don't have to read to adopt. You have to read to acquaint yourself, to get to know, oh, wow, this is how this is explained by these people. This is how these people believe that and that and that and that. And you'll find it in the book. I talk about it, especially if you're a Protestant, the Osbeck Confession, Heidelberg Catechism. I deal with the Westminster Confession. I deal with the Anglican, 39 articles. I deal with the Catholics, the current one, I think 1991, 92, the current formulation of their catechism, Assemblies of God, belief, and so on and so forth, the Savoy Confession, different beliefs or different statements of faith. Now, why do we have to do that? Because you have to know where we are coming from as Christians. We have to know where we are coming from. We don't just determine things by what is nice now, what is convenient now. Believe you me, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, the kinds of things we are doing may be totally irrelevant. But what Jesus did will always be relevant. What Paul wrote will always be relevant. What Peter did is always relevant. And if you go back, some of the church fathers, what Augustine wrote will always be relevant. What Thomas Aquinas wrote will always be relevant, because those are very fundamental to our belief system. So how do we arrive at the kind of governance system we have will determine our doctrine, instead of a person and what he thinks is a revelation that God has given to him? I'll rest my case for now, and I will continue from here when I come back. Thank you very much.